Here she is.
Hi.
Yay! Oh my God, it's Ashley C. Ford, everybody. Woo, 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 woo. Send up a ton of hearts. We're about to have the greatest conversation. Hi, Argentina. Hi, darling.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, so good. Everyone, we're going to turn the comments off in a second so that we don't have words scrolling up over Ashley's beautiful face. But could you all just send her a bunch of hearts and a bunch of love and let her know that you are here and that you're excited about this conversation. And then I like everyone's just shouting out their locations. Mexico City, Colorado, Argentina.
We're worldwide.
The book is upside down. I don't know if it's upside down. I think that it's just that Instagram mirrors it.
It's inverted, yeah.
All right, and there's Kemi Nekpapel. All right, we're going off comments now, and then if I can remember how, turn off commenting. Boom! Now it's just the two of us, alone at last. Hi, darling.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful, and it's wonderful to see you. And I have an introduction that I'm going to read about you so that the 4 people out there who don't know who you are will be able to find out who you are, and the people who do know who you are will be able to celebrate you as you should be celebrated and honored. So here is your introduction. Ashley C. Ford is a creative powerhouse. She is a writer, an educator, and a veteran podcaster. She's the former co-host of the HBO companion podcast Lovecraft County Radio and the current host of Ben & Jerry's Into the Mix about joy and justice, as well as Going Through It, which she calls a podcast about how hard it can be to figure out when to quit and when to keep going. I was a guest on that a few months ago, and I loved every moment of it. Ashley has written or guest edited for The Guardian, Elle Magazine, Slate, BuzzFeed, Teen Vogue, New York Magazine, Out Magazine, The New York Times, and various other web and print publications. She currently lives in Indianapolis with her husband, the poet and fiction writer Kelly Stacy, and their chocolate lab, we just have to relish the name, Astro Renegade Ford Stacy. And Ashley is, of course, the author of the New York Times bestselling memoir, her gem of a debut book, a beautiful and powerful story that will break your heart, and the reason we're gathered here this evening, Somebody's Daughter. This is a book about forging identity and strength from the ashes of secrets, poverty, violence, complex relationships with family, and it is stunning. And here are just a sample of the comments. I had to share this with you, Ashley. When I announced on social media that Somebody's Daughter was going to be the next selection in the Onward Book Club, these are some of the things that people said. Incredible read, so profound, deep, insightful, joyful, heartbreaking. It's absolutely fantastic. These are all different people. I couldn't put it down. I devoured this book. Such a phenomenal book. Best memoir ever. I highly recommend the audiobook. Ashley Ford is a gifted, soulful writer. I'm so glad you picked this. Excellent choice. Ashley C. Ford, what a woman, 20 exclamation points. Such a powerful book. I love this book so much, and not just because I'm also from Indiana. I love the book. It changed my life. Great read, no easy answers. Well done. One of the best books I've ever read. I can listen to her all day. Unfortunately, we do not have all day. We only have about an hour. So we'll get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, Ashley C. Ford, welcome to the Onward Book Club. Thank you for honoring us with your presence.
I am so honored to be here and to be present with you right now, Liz. It is not just an honor to share space with you and with your audience, but I mean anybody who's picked up this book. It's wild that like we have this little connection to each other that's sort of bound up in being an artist who shares.
Yeah, and I think that will bring me right to my very first question. Thank you for like setting me up with a nice softball so I can thank you for pitching me the segue into the actual interview. Being an artist who shares. So I think one of the things that people love so much about you and about this book and about your presence in the world is how vulnerable you are and how honest you are and how intimately you reveal yourself. And I wondered, as a memoirist, I am asking this for my own reasons, but also because there are a lot of people on this call who write. Did you at any point have cold feet about how much you were revealing about? Let's start with yourself before we get into how much you were revealing about your family, because I think that's a question that every memoirist has to face. What to share, what to not.
Absolutely. I absolutely had cold feet. That's why it took me so long. You know, it's not a very long book to have taken 10 years to write. Those 10 years were not spent at my desk. Those 10 years were spent in a lot of therapist's office and spent in bed, learning how to rest. They were spent in newsrooms learning how to report, which led to me being able to report quite a bit on myself to a certain extent. Yeah, it was rough the whole time. I knew that I was, even in the pursuit of this project, that there was also a part of me running from it the entire time. And I knew that that would not do, and it could not lead to the kind of book I wanted to write, and that I was going to have to find a way to introduce those opposing forces to one another. And that took intense therapy. That took going away and focusing on myself and investing in myself in a way that I not only never imagined would be possible, but also never imagined I would desire. Um,
Mm.
but that's a lot of what I got out of this book, was figuring out um, that there were a lot of things in my life that I didn't know how to own for myself, my story included. And one of those things was desire. It
Mm.
was less so like getting over the fear of revealing too much of myself and letting myself have the desire to share and to connect with other people.
Wow, I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about that kind of revelatory vulnerability as a desire. And now that you've named it, I recognize it in myself.
Mhm.
Um, that because I've also been asked this question, like, you've been so vulnerable, is it okay? And it's like, no, you're right. I want you to know these things about me. I
Mhm.
want to tell these stories about myself.
Mhm.
This isn't an art. I mean, it's arduous because it's a journey,
Right.
but thank you for naming that and for allowing yourself. I've heard you say in interviews that when you were raised, and you were raised by a very strained mother, to put
Mhm.
it mildly, who had a husband who was in prison, who was living on $40,000 a year as a correctional officer, had four children,
Mhm.
was very young, was not being served by the culture in which she lived, and you have spoken very eloquently about being taught that anything you wanted that was beyond what she could provide was disloyalty to her.
Mhm.
And you and I have talked before about toxic loyalty
Mhm.
and about toxic family loyalty. And I wonder if you can speak about coming into your own, getting over that idea that if I want something, I'm a problem.
Mm.
If I want something that somebody else might not be able to provide, then I'm being difficult, and I should really just go in my room and be quiet.
Yeah.
Because this memoir, by the way, and we're talking again, I'm just going to keep. I also love the cover so much. Somebody's daughter. Um, this is not somebody who decided to stay in her room and be quiet.
No. No.
So how did you heal from the feeling like any desire that you had was an affront to your mother?
It was a combination of things. I think it was at first it was allowing myself to be honest with myself, you know, because the truth of the matter was that even having trained myself to want very little and
Mm.
need very little, spending the majority of my life in that form of training, uh, I still had this desire, this overall desire that I was convinced was real and was right. And that was that I should not lie to myself about what I see and what I experience. And when I realized that I was lying to myself to a certain extent about what I wanted and what I needed, from myself and from others and from the world, I could not bear to hold on to the lie. It felt like such a betrayal of myself that I could not abide it. It was a step too far. to lie to myself and say, doing it this way is working. I feel great. I feel amazing. This is all going really, really well. I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, Ashley, this is clearly not the only way. Your world has expanded so much by just living in a place where your family doesn't live, going away to college, moving to a different state, having friends here, talking to people from there, learning new languages. All of these things are happening. It is expanding my imagination, and you can't expand your imagination without expanding your desire. It expands your desire, and not just to consume, but to see, to experience, to touch, to taste, like all of those things. And I couldn't lie to myself about the fact that my desire was expanding. And the girl or the woman who thought it was safer to want less and need less was losing ground in my heart. She just wasn't in control anymore. She was not convincing anymore. Everything she told me to do, everything she told me wasn't that was important, that I had pursued in this great quest to like wrangle stability and get away from chaos in my life and have more control. Nothing she told me to do led to a happier version of me, even if it led to a calmer version of me. It did not lead to a happier version of me. I was not having a happier experience. So I think that that was really, I said it was the first thing, but I don't want to keep going with this question, but it was really the main thing. It was just being honest with myself about the fact that this is not working. The way I've been doing it before, the way I've been taught to do it is not going well. And lying to myself isn't going to work. So what are we going to do? I don't know, but we're going to
But
do
not
something
this.
different, but not this, not
I've
this,
often said that real transformation often begins with just those two words, not
not
this.
this.
And I think a lot of times we don't even let ourselves say that because we feel like you're not allowed to say that till you have a plan. But I think it's okay to just sit for a while and I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know what I want that isn't this, but this isn't it. I can't force myself to feel okay in this
Yes,
any longer.
yes.
Um, yeah.
And sitting in
Whew.
a place of I don't know, like letting yourself know what that's like and feel like the disappointment and the pain and the suffering, but also like the joy and the pleasure and like the exhilaration of being in that place is is an invaluable privilege of a position. Some people, they've got to show up every day, or somebody doesn't eat. They got to show up every day, or somebody doesn't have a roof over their head or something. Their lives are such that they have to snatch every moment and turn it into material resource every moment that they have.
Mm.
And I have the privilege of sitting down and getting bored enough to hear myself and be honest with myself about what I hear. Like it's a great privilege, and taking it for granted was easy, but it's not what I
Mm.
wanted.
Um, you spoke earlier about spending time in journalistic settings and learning
Hmm.
how to report. And one thing that I found really interesting about this book, so the title is Somebody's Daughter, and part of the story is about your father. It's not, this is what I want to say, it's not about your father. This book is not about your father.
No.
And I sort of expected it to be when I picked it up,
Hmm.
when I knew what the backstory was. And the backstory was that your father spent a great deal of time in prison your whole entire childhood. You didn't find out till much later that he was in prison for rape, for harming somebody's daughter
Hmm.
is plural. Um, at the same time as being somebody who cared about you and loved you and wrote you letters and gave you a certain degree of safety. And and I really kind of thought, because I've been trained by a certain kind of memoir and a certain kind of expose, that this was going to be a book about you looking into that, like going
Hmm.
deep into that crime, like chasing down that story, reporting on that story. And I so admire that you didn't.
Hmm.
that there's, what I'm projecting, and I'd love to know if this is accurate, is that you wanted to tell your own story, and also that story wasn't yours to tell. And I wondered if at any point in those 10 years, the story had taken a direction where it was more of an investigation into him and into his past.
Absolutely. You actually like really hit the nail on the head with that because initially, I tell people all the time, I've said in interviews a lot, when I started writing this book, it was all about my dad. It was all about my dad, what I knew about him, what I didn't know about him. It sort of followed the narrative or the story of how I was grabbing these little pieces of him over time, like little bits of clay that I was forming into, a bust of what I thought he was or what I thought I could discover about him from gathering these little pieces and from having them. And I recognized at a certain point in the writing process when it wasn't really working and I wasn't really feeling connected to it, that a big part of the reason why that was happening is because it was an attempt to continue a fantasy. It
Mm.
was still an attempt to try and be close to my dad or know my dad in a time when I could not be close to him and could not know him. I can't go back. He can't go back. We can't make different decisions, and my investigatory curiosity was really trying to get me to form a new version of my past, which is the fantasy that was holding me back from living my life in the present as it was, and I could not dive into creating a story like that without re-traumatizing myself and without, to be perfectly honest, harming the integrity that I wanted to be able to hold as someone who considers themselves a truth teller, as much as anybody can be. So I knew that that wasn't going to work. And I also knew that if I dug into my dad's past, the primary story of his past, the action that marks him forever is the fact that he sexually assaulted, that he raped two women, strangers. That is the ultimate story of his life, according to any story you'd ever write, right? And that is what he caused. That is what he drew into his life. Those are decisions that he made. And I did not want to start trying to tell that story from his perspective because he's the only one who I would have real contact with or access to, and leave the stories of his victims completely out to themselves. I did not want to re traumatize them, possibly by reaching out to them and making the connection between this story and their lives. I did not want them to see my name on the covers of books and know that their story was being
Mm.
told by me behind that cover. As someone who has been sexually assaulted and raped, I could not imagine if I had been on the other side of it that that would have felt in any way healing. And if it wasn't going to be healing,
Mm.
then I wasn't interested. And if it had the potential to be harmful in a way that could be avoided, then I wasn't going to do that either. I just wasn't going to participate in that. It felt like there would be no difference between doing that to them and doing it to anybody else, myself included. So I couldn't do it. I'm in control of my story. Nobody else is. And the only way I feel comfortable talking about another person's story is when and where it intersects with mine in ways observable by me.
Which brings us to your mother.
Mhm. Which brings us
So,
there.
and beautifully answered. And I knew that you had thought this out. Um,
Mhm.
you know, I I know your ethical heart, and I knew that you had thought out that question, and I am really appreciative to get to hear your thought process on it,
Thank you for
and I admire it.
asking.
Well, you're welcome. I wanted to know. That's why I started this book club. Because I read things and I want to know, and I also ask writer to writer, and because again, speaking to the people out there who are working on or considering writing memoir, and as somebody who's written memoir and I'm writing another one now, it's a very, very, very different process than writing fiction. It's a very different process.
Yes.
And there's so many ethical questions about how to write about other people's lives, the living and the dead. And I have to confess that I thought your mother had passed away because of the way you were writing about her. I was like, you can't tell this kind of truth about anybody who's still alive.
Yeah, no.
I was like, and then when I realized that she is still alive, that at the time of this writing she was still alive, I was like, oh, we really need to talk about this. How did that come down? Because I had a conversation that I quote often with Cheryl Strayed one time, where she said she felt like, in a way, one of the luckiest things that ever happened to her, as well as being the worst, was her mother's death, which meant that she could write freely about her. And how did you navigate that? There's a point at the end of the book where your mom says, we had fun times too. Like, don't forget that we had fun times too, because she's a harrowing presence in this book. She's a terrifying and harrowing presence, and violent and terrifying is the word. And so, yeah, how'd you do that?
I think it's
and listen up, everybody who's working on memoirs about challenging family members.
You know what? But this is really important, and I love answering this question because there's like, this question is easy to answer and hard to answer, because when people ask me about my mom, they are thinking about their mom. People are never asking me about my mom and really thinking about my mom. They're asking me about my mom and thinking about their mom and about what their relationship like is with their mom, the history of that, some of the comfort they have traditionally found in their mom, closeness they may feel to their mother, like all of those things. And the problem is that my mother and I have never had a relationship where the foundation of it was compassion, kindness, comfort, any of those things, affection, like those things. It's not just that those things weren't overly present, it's that they were like rarely present. And so I always try to explain, when I'm talking about, the vulnerability or the bravery of writing about my mother this way, that I probably had different stakes than you. I probably had different stakes of what there was to lose in the relationship when I decided to write the book and write it the way I did. Um, what has been really interesting for me, to be perfectly honest, is the reaction to people, with people being like, it's wild to me, or they're happy for me that I could get to that place, but how did you get to that place where you could write so honestly about your mother? And I'm sitting there knowing that I held back. You know what I mean?
You were probably, yes,
I'm sitting there,
have no doubt that
you know,
that you could have gone a lot harder. And yeah,
the number one comment I've gotten from my family members, the generation above me, aunts, uncles, family, friends, the number one comment that I've gotten from them when it comes to that element of my book is like, I'm really glad you were fair. You were very, very fair.
Wow.
That has been
Wow.
the
Yeah, and
number
they
one
know.
response, because they know they were there,
No. Yeah.
and I've had a situation, or a conversation actually not too long ago, where I did a speaking event and I was asked a similar question. The the person I was in conversation with said, well, how many of these events has your mom come to? Or, what has she, seen you do or be part of? And I'm like,
Mm.
nothing, not one. Well, she hasn't seen you read your book. She hasn't come to one signing. You did this. You were the writer in residence at your alma mater. She didn't come. I'm like, she didn't visit me when I was in college. Like, you guys, like, it's not different. And I think people want so badly for there to be the kind of redemption where there is a complete behavioral change
Yeah.
with my mother. And I'm really lucky and to a certain extent, I mean, not lucky in the circumstance, but lucky that by the time the book came out, I was already in a place where I knew not to expect different.
Right.
I am not surprised at all by the fact that my mom just kind of doesn't mention the book.
Right.
She kind of doesn't talk about it. She's told me twice that she's proud of me, nebulously, you know, amorphously proud of me. But but she hasn't read the book, and she
You.
probably never will.
It sounds like you've learned, as we say in the rooms of recovery, not to go to the hardware store for milk,
I have learned
right?
not to go to the hardware store for milk
There's
because
never going to be any milk there.
you can only drink so many nails.
You can.
You can only drink so many nails before you get the message that this is incompatible with your system.
Yeah.
And so I accept her for who she is. I love her for exactly who she is. I do not expect her to be anything different. And I am aware and not at all like annoyed by the fact that that's not other people's situation and it's hard for them to it's not and that it's hard for them to understand. Like, good for them. Good for
Must,
you. I'm glad.
must be nice.
I mean, it must be nice. It's lovely,
Must
because
be
I
nice to have a
never,
relationship to
it
risk.
must be lovely because I don't have it. And it's like, people, what drives you? I bet your parents are so proud. And I'm like, they are proud, but that is not what drives me because over the course of my life, it just did not count for much. And couldn't lie to myself about that, even
Uh,
when it hurt.
mm, um, I feel like that's going to be very, very healing to some people out there.
Thank you.
Because yeah, I feel like there's great medicine in that. Um, Speaking of medicine,
Mm.
I had a question about the healing properties of memoir writing. um, did, my friend Ann Patchett said after she wrote Truth and Beauty, about that incredible memoir about her friend uh, Lucy Greeley, and she wrote it right after her friend died, and she was in a lot of pain, and she wrote the memoir, and she wrote it, and she always says that it healed her, to write it. That it was the way she described it is it's like the pages, like they're like ink blotters that pull the pain out of you.
Mm.
Like every single page that you write, it's like the pain comes out of you and it's in ink on the page and it's not in you anymore, it's on the page. And I wondered if you had that experience with this, or if you spoke about doing a lot of therapy
Mhm.
in the 10 years leading up to writing this book. Was your process more that you had to heal, and then once you had healed, you were able to write? Or is it the writing healed me, or is it a combo platter?
You know, maybe if I wrote like Ann Patchett, it would heal me. Maybe, maybe if I could write Ann Patchett level of prose, it would also heal me. But that has not been my experience. My experience has been that my writing introduces me to the places where I need to do more healing.
Mm,
That's my experience, is that it sort of is the way I am writing can feel very symptomatic of where I am emotionally and what I need to deal with. There were certain points in the book, and not the points I expected, when I was writing, that I just stopped and would be like, almost like my hands would not type more. Like in this area, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll just move to another section. And then I come back to
mm,
that section and I'd go to like, and I in my head be like, this is what you're going to say next. And my hands would not do it. And I would start to feel kind of weird and panicky. And then I would want to go have a cigarette, have a drink. I would want to go do something to like get it off me. Whatever that was needs to go away. I'll come back to that section tomorrow, you know, and then I don't. I come back to it 2 days later, and it's the same thing. And eventually, I recognize that that is a sign that whatever I was about to write about is something that I am not done dealing with, or at the very least, is not done dealing with me.
Mm.
And I'm either going to wrestle with it or I'm going to have this hole in the story I'm trying to tell in this moment. And there were times where I definitely went, this is too much, this is too hard, and put it away and decided I'll figure a way around it. I'll write around it. I'm just not going to write that part. I'm not going to write through it. And then found that the book doesn't work. It doesn't work unless I write about this. It doesn't work unless I include it. It doesn't like this. This thing is actually so important that it does. The whole story doesn't work unless I include it. And then I have to ask myself, well, why is that the case? Why is it that important? I don't think it's that important. It's just something I'm trying to say. But it's like, okay, well, your body disagrees. Your body is saying that something else is going on. And what are you going to do about that? Because you know yourself, now that you see it, now that you recognize it, now that you recognize it, there is no putting it back in a drawer and closing the drawer and pretending it's not there. It's like now you have laser vision, and every time you look in that direction, you see it sitting there through the drawer. And you're either going to be preoccupied or you're going to be in the process of doing something, of healing, of talking to someone, of uncovering, of unraveling. Whatever it is you got to do, you got to go do it. And that's really what happened to me a lot with this book. Multiple times I really thought, man, I can just write. I know I got it. I'm a skilled writer. I went to school for this. People pay me to do this. I can write around this. I know that I can make this work. And it couldn't work and be true. And that was the main goal for the book, was for it to be true, was for it to be fair and for it to be true.
God, isn't it incredible how the body um, knows? I remember
Yes.
saying to a friend of mine once about a situation. I said, it's almost like it's such a silly, innocent thing to say, but I was like, it's almost like my body, knew it like months before I did. And she just started laughing and she said, only
Yes.
always. And I find it amazing. I've also had that where I physically have to get up and walk away. I can't be in the room with the laptop that's waiting for me to say the thing I can't say yet. Like
Yes.
it requires a lot of baths for me. A lot of baths with a lot of salt in the bath water.
Yes.
There's almost like the electricity has to come out of me through salt water, because it's too hard to tell. It's too hard to face.
Yes.
Um, I want to talk about how you became reacquainted with, or for the first time met your body. Um,
Mm.
a lot of this book is about your body. You're telling the story of what happens to the body of this girl. Um, and it's a body that's very familiar with violence from an early age, and then is sexually assaulted from an early age, heartbreakingly at the moment that you were trying to end a very early dysfunctional relationship with a boy in your school. And there's the most devastating piece of writing, and just as craft, the most beautiful piece of writing of the aftermath of that assault, um, where you left your body behind in the room where it had happened, and just separated, which seems like a really good idea, a good thing to do at that moment, like the
Mm-hmm.
best idea you could have had.
Right.
I've left my body too many times. It's like, oh, I'm not even going to be in here. Like, this is not safe. I'm leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the the disassociation. There's two questions I have. One is how you became reacquainted with your body, and the other is more of an observation of something I noticed in the book that I also experienced, was your description of puberty as almost like a horror movie, of watching your body change in a way that you couldn't control, and then watching the impact that that had on people and the different way that they treated you and the lack of safety that you suddenly had and the assumptions that people made about you because of what your body looked like, and the fear in your mother and your grandmother as they watched your body change, knowing what they knew about the realities of the world. And um, yeah, I also experienced puberty as horrific,
Mm-hmm.
terrifying and horrible. Like and the most out of control I've ever felt in my entire life. So I wonder what it took for you to reassociate yourself with with this form that your soul inhabits and that your mind inhabits, after so much dissociation.
You know, I think I was doing the work in ways I recognized and didn't along the way, over and over. You know, there were little things, little reclamations that took place, and that gave me like at least the the feeling that like when things were getting a little too weird about my body, that I was unsettled enough to be like, it's getting kind of weird about your body, you know, and maybe you're not ready to deal with it yet, but let's recognize between each other that it's getting a little weird, you know, and I would note that and I would be like, okay, like it is, it's getting kind of weird, and there are things that I want to do. You know, it started in college, around the time I was 20, 21 years old, of taking photos of myself for me and looking at my body and really like having the visual experience of my body. And that was so complicated because I could see the things that were technically imperfections. I could see the things that other people would call imperfections, but I could also feel myself looking at these photos and not being disgusted, not being disappointed, you know, not feeling like anything I saw was bad, and actually feeling quite lovely about the way my body was shaped and about the way it was formed. And then trying to hold on to that feeling for as long as possible, but also feeling like the assault of the world and, you know, family members, you know, and how they felt about my body. And it really did not start to take hold, I would say, until I was probably early 30s. And it had, I hate, like, I'm not gonna say it has anything to do with a man for real, okay? But it does have something to do with the fact that I was in a relationship, and am in a relationship with someone who just, I mean, with someone who saw me in a way that I never imagined anyone could see me, someone who expanded my imagination about myself, and so expanded my desire to know myself and to feel good about myself and to feel good in my body and to think differently, about the way I assessed things like health, the way I assessed certain things like femininity. You know, I remember the first time I complained about shaving my legs after my husband, my then boyfriend, now husband, moved in. And I remember his response being like, well, why do you do it? And me being like, well, because that's what you do, right? Like, clear, like that's what you do. Like, you shave your legs, you know? And him being like, well, okay, if you want to shave them, shave them. But if you don't, then don't. And me being like, yeah, you say that now, but will you feel like that in, you know, 2 days? And him being like, you know, what does this decision have to do with me?
Wow.
You know, what does this have to do with me? Like, if you like your legs shaven, I like your legs shaven. If you like your legs hairy, I like your legs hairy. I like you. I don't like you in particular ways and in particular shapes. I like you. I love you. And I was like, wait a minute. Like, you know, like,
I like how your head just did the dog, like,
right? Like, huh? Like, what do you mean? You know, and
what's
it
that?
it is really hard to be loved as well as I have been loved and not have some of that rub off on you toward yourself. Not even just toward the other person, but like toward yourself. And being with him, I just, and knowing that I have great taste, right? So I'm like, he's amazing. Like, I married a man, okay? So he's the best one. There aren't better ones, because if there was a better one, like, I would be single or with that guy. But I'm not with that guy because I got the best one, right? Like, that's how I
Oh.
feel. And I have to ask myself, like, if I got the best one, then why don't I trust his taste?
Mm.
Why don't I trust what he tells me he sees and what he observes? And it wasn't so much that, like, he was like, you're beautiful, and believe that. And I was like, oh, wow, the level of testosterone coming at me has changed the way I see myself. And the validation has given me the power to finally not care about what anyone else thinks about me. It wasn't like that. He just gave me a reason to suspect that all the negative things that I thought about myself might not be correct. They might not be totally correct. And as soon as I thought that they might not be correct, I had reason to explore and find out for myself what I believed. And when I went into those feelings and those that sort of research on myself, when it came to my body, trying to really feel my body, my muscles, my skin, like all of those things, I was like, this is fantastic. This is a fantastic experience. Like, I know that I know that there are rooms that I walk into to be, and it happens to me all the time, where I am a black, heavier woman, and there are people who pretend not to see me.
Mm.
There are people who just go, there are people who run into me on the sidewalk like I wasn't there. You know what I mean? And I know that in certain spaces that this body renders me invisible because of what they choose not to see or because of what they can't see. But I'm not invisible.
Mm.
I'm here. I'm always here.
Mm.
And even when invisibility felt like my superpower, I was always there. I was always having a real experience. And so I'm just honest with myself and with my body about that now. I don't make my body lie to me, and I don't lie to my body. We were there. We saw it. We felt it. We heard it. We tasted it. We were there. And accepting that just allows me to live a fuller life, because my experiences are not dulled anymore. And I didn't know they were dulled before. I thought I was just turning off the bad feelings. I didn't know that I was taking the good ones with them.
Wow. I don't make my body lie to me, and I don't lie to my body.
Yeah.
I mean, there it is. That's it. Um, there's so many things you just said. I had like 10 sub
Sorry.
parentheses. Like, I wanted to unpack that entire thing, but where I find my mind going in this is, how did you learn to be so loving? This is a question that I've had for you since reading the book, because you were not properly love nourished um, as a child, and many people are not properly love nourished, and it's one of the worst harms that can happen to a human being. It's one of the core needs, to be given that warmth and that affection and that nourishment. And I know a couple people like you. I've got a couple friends that I really identify this in, where it's like, how have you become so loving to so many people when you weren't being fed that? Where did you learn how to do it? Because even from the very earliest pages of this book, there's these two parallel stories about love and nourishment happening. And one is what your mother is doing to you, and the other is the way you're loving your brother, and the way you're loving your half sister when she arrives, and the way you love your friends. And I know the way that you love as an auntie and as a godmother. I know the way that you love the world as an activist and as a writer. I know the way that you love your husband by the way that you just spoke about him. Like, I know your friends who love you and who receive this incredible, like, flowing nourishment of love. Um, you would have such a good excuse to be such an angry, bitter, misanthropic, just pissed off, like closed off. You'd have such a good excuse, and you could sit in therapist's office forever saying, I wasn't loved, and so I don't know how to love. And yet you seem to have been born with it. Or do you think that it was being fed to you somehow?
I have always, part of the reason why I called the book Somebody's Daughter, there are a lot of reasons why I ended up with that title. One of them being that I felt like, despite the fact that I have two biological parents, I was raised in micro moments by so many people. There were so many people when I was growing up, for whatever reason, who pulled me aside and said an extra kind word to me, or gave me a little more encouragement, or said something in a moment that was so special to me. And in a lot of cases, I don't think they understood how special it was, because I was love starved and I was touch starved and I was, you know, I wanted so badly to be enveloped and to be held and to be comforted and to be soothed and to be pushed compassionately and kindly. I wanted all of those things that are supposed to come standard, technically with parents. And I didn't get them, but I never found the giving of it hard. And I think that it would maybe be easier to be bitter about that. Like, a little bitter about the fact that it didn't feel like such a challenge for me to love children and to want to care for them. It didn't
Oh, right.
feel
Like, how hard is it? How hard would it be to hug your
like,
kid?
how hard would it be to
I can
hug
hug
and love on
anybody's
your
kid.
kid?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Would
so
it have
that's,
killed you?
but I didn't
Yeah.
understand, everybody has
Yeah.
their own thing going
Yeah.
on, and I
Yeah.
understood that. And I also,
Mm.
I am what they technically call an older millennial, because I was born in 1987. And one of the things that is true about that time and about the years, let's say from that time until the decade after, is that so much of film and TV, which I was placed in front of constantly, especially anything that was meant for kids, was about ultimately the fact that if you don't hold on to this sense of what it was like to be a kid, if you don't hold on to your sense that other people in the world have their own feelings and their own experiences, you will turn into not just the bad guy, but like the villain. You'll become the person who hurts people.
Mm.
And I knew, not always, it comes later that you realize that pain is inevitable and suffering not necessarily. Um, but I knew that I might hurt people and that I would have to apologize and that would be, important and all those things. But it also felt really important to me that I try not to. It felt very important to me that I try not to hurt people and that I try not to harm them, and that I look for the people who needed an extra word of encouragement, or who needed some soothing, or who needed to be held, because I could do it and it felt good to me. The bitterness, the anger, the resentment, the all of that stuff, it's not that it wasn't worthy. It wasn't that I was like, that's a bad idea. It just didn't feel good inside. When I did indulge in those behaviors, they never felt good. They never felt right. I never hit and felt like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I never like
Never
yelled and
insulted anybody and
I
walked away feeling great.
I haven't listen. I've insulted people and walked away feeling like you deserve that. But I have never insulted a person and watched them react with sadness and or fear or whatever, and felt like, yeah,
Mm.
that was the right thing to do, Ashley
Mm.
Ford. It just hasn't happened yet. And that is not to say that I'm not a fighter. It's not to say that I am not a person who's good at holding her boundaries, or can like tell a person what's what when they need to hear it. All of that is true. I can absolutely do it. Um, but it's not what builds me up. It's not what feels like forward to me. It doesn't feel a lot of times like anything. It feels like, oh man, now I've got to go do this real quick. I've got to go put this person in their place real quick, which feels terrible even when necessary.
Yeah.
I don't like it. It doesn't feel good to me. But being kind and being loving and being, a person people can count on, that's never ever steered me wrong.
Mm.
That has never ever steered me wrong. I've, like most people who feel like that, gotten into some people pleasing behaviors over the years and found my way out of those in order to be a more trustworthy, reliable person to myself. I've worked on
I
that.
don't
I've
know
done that.
anything
It's been
about
great.
people pleasing. What's that
You
all
know,
about? Wait, you're saying that that can become problematic?
it
So
can
weird.
become a little
Huh. And
problematic.
then that's
Yes.
some sort of abandonment of self
Turns
involved in that.
out.
That's interesting. That's not something I've ever had to face.
It turns out that's what we're dealing with. And it sucks. And I don't want to be that person, but I do
Yeah.
want to
Well, you
be
can't really
good to the
serve
people I love.
from that place.
You
You can't
can.
really serve from that place because you've become so depleted and disconnected from yourself that
Yes.
it doesn't really work.
Yes.
You can't sustain a life of service from a place of abandonment of self. It
No.
doesn't. It doesn't
And it
work.
doesn't
Um,
feel good.
no, because it doesn't feel good. I wanted to ask you, there's a line in the book where your grandmother teaches you how to pray, and she says,
Mm.
you don't just ask for things when you pray. You pray to say thank you to God, and you pray so He knows you're thinking about the right things.
Hmm.
I love that line so much. You pray to say thank you to God, and you pray so He knows you're thinking about the right things. Um, so I have two questions about that. One is that that leads you in the book to contemplate whether you've been praying wrong, which is there's a
Hmm.
theme in the book about you always trying to figure out how to do it right to stay safe. Like, what is the right way? How do I finesse and control this situation? Am I doing it wrong? Am I wrong and bad?
Hmm.
But I wonder, I always ask people in the book club about their current relationship, if any, with spirituality and the connection, if any, between spirituality and creativity, because that's such an interesting subject for me. So if you feel comfortable speaking about that,
Yeah.
speak about that. And if you don't, we will move right along.
No, I feel comfortable talking about it. I don't have a lot of comfortable answers just because I feel really content to be in a place of sort of reading and trying and looking and observing. And I don't, what I want to avoid is bringing some sort of stringent practice or idea in my life that does what I fear religion and spirituality can do, which is remove me from myself. And not in a sense of like exaltation or a sense of like, you know, um, divine ascension in some way, but in a way that doesn't feel true to me. And I learn how to abandon myself
Mm,
in a practice. I worry about that all the time. So I can be kind of leery and kind of wary of anything that's organized. But I am not arrogant enough to feel like I know for sure, or to be like, no, there's no way that's true, or there's no way that's right. I never feel like that because I don't feel like that's true. I don't feel like I know for sure that there's no way. So I mostly just listen and observe, and I watch how other people experience. As far as like my practices over here, there's a lot of candle lighting and intention making and journaling. There is more and more meditation via dance, and eating slowly and gardening. And right now, those all feel very spiritual to me in a way that I'm very content with.
that's a beautiful answer and didn't
Yeah.
feel arrogant at all and actually felt delicious and makes sense and also explains the kind of radiance that you have. I'm like, oh, well, if we're doing candle lighting and gardening and dancing, then it's going to be good. And listening to the body, I love the adage that intuition is eavesdropping on the cosmic mind.
Ooh.
And I think that's this in my life. I feel like the deepest connection I have to self and to the divine is through intuition.
Mm.
And feeling like that's the control panel guidance system. Like something's telling me no, yes,
Yes.
red light, green light, yellow light.
Mm-hmm.
You
Absolutely.
know, I don't know how to read. Nope.
Mm-mm.
I couldn't tell you why, but my intuition is saying no to this, and I'm learning the older I get to trust that more and more. Certain invitations come in, and I hear myself speak before I've even finished reading the email. I'm like, nope, nope,
Yep.
nope. You know, it's so, you know, and I'm like, wow, that's a ferocious no. Like, where did that come from? And then, you know, and I don't backtrack on that anymore. It's like that was a strong reaction. I'm going to trust that. That was something was telling me, nope, nope, nope. Not
Nope.
really hard. I wanted to ask you just for a couple sentences. There's
Mm-hmm.
three women who I wanted to ask you about who I know you have, who I know have been impactful in your life. And I was wondering if you would just give us a couple sentences on each one of them on what they mean to you. And of course, I'm going to start with Oprah Winfrey.
Uh, okay.
Because we
To
always
me,
have to start with
we
Oprah
always
Winfrey.
have to start with Oprah. I love her. Um, to me, Oprah is both vision and grounded. I've never met a person more completely aligned with the soles of her feet and the stars above her head. You know what I mean? Like, I really love that about her. And she, yes, that's Oprah for me. She feels like sunshine. And I really, really adore her.
She's
I adore her.
amazing. I had the opportunity one time to say to her, um, what I admire most about her, which is I've never seen her greatness interfere with her goodness.
Mm,
Um, and that's the feet on the ground, right? She's just good.
yes.
She's great, a great being, and she's also a good person
I
every
agree.
minute. Um, Roxane Gay.
Roxane Gay. Roxanne is one of the safest places I have ever had to put my heart and my fear. She can hold the best news I've ever had on my greatest day and the worst news I've ever had on the most tragic day of my life. She could hold both of those and she would only ever seek to give me or be exactly what I needed in that moment, beyond even my understanding. Yeah, that's right, Sam.
Whew. And the last
Oh
one is your
man,
friend of mine.
I gotta stop talking about her. Don't ever ask me about
I
her.
know, I know.
Okay,
She's
yeah. So
got like the gravitational power of her own planet is how I see her. Like she's so extraordinary.
yeah.
Um, and your friend of mine, Glennon Doyle.
And Glennon is so ferocious.
Ferocious.
Being
I don't know if people
she's
realize it.
ferocious. Being under
Ferocious.
her umbrella of love and care and kindness and friendship feels like like there's nothing anybody could throw at you that she would not like, you know what I mean? As long as you're on the right side, like don't be doing anything too wild. But like her love, Glennon's love is like is like a it's a wall with a door. You know what I mean? It's a wall with a door, And it's like that is a strong wall and it's protecting everything about it. And you might feel excluded by that wall or something. You might have some sort of thing against like there's a wall there. And all you really ever had to do was knock on the door
That's right.
and introduce yourself to come in to be invited inside. Like that's really it. The wall is not about you. It's about the people she loves on the other side. And that wall is really just her ferocity.
For
Like that's what it is.
It's beautifully, beautifully put. And once you go through the door, and you're behind the protection of a wall, if anyone tries to harm you, she'll shoot flaming arrows at them all day and all night.
All day and all night.
Gladly, like she will gladly kill and die for
Yes.
you.
Yes.
When you say fierce, it's like to the death,
It's
to the
ferocious.
death.
I admire so much about her as a writer, as a mother, as a person.
Yeah,
Like she's just exquisite.
I agree. I agree. Um, well, I have taken all the time that I have requested of you, and I don't want to disrespect you by taking any more of it, even though I always
Liz.
get lost in talking to you. I just love it, and I hope that everyone please pick up Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford and check her out in the various podcast realms in which she is a stellar voice. I actually opened up the chat for people to ask questions that they wanted to know. And my favorite was somebody named Allie asked, wanted to know of you, what's it like to have the dreamiest voice? Swoon.
It's
You really do
really
have an
nice. People are
extraordinary voice.
very kind to me
You
about my voice, and I really
and
appreciate
you
that.
also
It's very kind.
have a dreamy voice as a writer.
Thank
And
you.
I wanted to end by saying two things, which is you said if I could write like Ann Patchett, you are every bet shoulder to shoulder with Ann Patchett and the greatest writers of our age. So don't ever for a minute not know that. And the other thing that I want to say is one of the most moving parts in the book for me was the teacher that you had who was so kind and who saw you and who tried so hard to uplift you and to create projects for you and said to you, don't ever forget you wrote a whole book. Um, when you were a very young person, you wrote a whole. He said, don't ever forget that you wrote a whole book. Like Ashley Ford, you wrote a whole book. Don't ever forget that. And it was no small thing. Um, there is such weight in this book. There is such wisdom in this book. There is such grace and mercy and compassion and truth. And you wrote it with every cell of your body, and it's in here. It's all in here. And I love you for it. And I will always be a fan, and I will always be a fan of whatever you create in the world. And so will a lot of us. So
Thank you,
keep going.
Liz. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Thank you for sharing your audience with me, for sharing the book with them, for having this conversation. You are such an awesome person, and I really look forward to hugging you
Oh,
someday.
I let's put that on the calendar. Ashley C. Ford Hug Day. That's gonna happen.
It'll happen.
That's great. I forget that we've never been in a room together
I
because I
know.
feel so intimate with you. But that day will come. And thank you to everybody who joined in. If you could send up a whole bunch of hearts and love.
Thank you,
We,
guys.
many of us were here with you in this moment, but thousands more will watch this video later. And you are just so loved, and your work is so important. And we're so grateful that you graced us with your beauty. And oh, I forgot, I got to take a picture.
Okay.
Oh, wait, no, I don't have to do that anymore. I think Instagram made it
Oh, yeah.
so that never
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah,
But I
you
kind
can
of want
just
to
like
anyway.
scroll.
Let's take, okay. All right, I'm closing out the live. Bye, everybody. Thank you for
Bye.
joining us on the Onward Book Club. Thank you, Ashley C. Ford. You're the
Thank
best.
you, Liz.
Bye.
Bye.